Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, on today, the 16th of November 2022. A run through the front lines. As you'll know, there was about 4 waves of cruise missile attacks and drone attacks into Ukraine yesterday, causing quite a lot of destruction. A lot of them were shot down. Let's just have a look at the stats here. So it seems to be 73 cruise missiles, 10 Shaheeds and one other type of drone. 90 cruise missiles were launched, 73 shot down, 81% hit rate. That's quite impressive, but of course, still, when you have that many drones getting through, even though proportionally it's not huge, in real terms, that still does significant damage to the infrastructure, and that's exactly what has happened. Apparently, NASAMS, which is just the Norwegian or national cooperation between America and Norway in creating this air defense missile system. So there's, I think, 2 of those systems in Ukraine at the moment. Anyway, 10 out of 10 cruise missiles targeted were hit. And here's an example of that happening. So this is doing the rounds at the moment. I don't know if this is definitely a NASAMS, but that looks pretty effective. It's just worth seeing that again. I mean, look at the speed at which the cruise is going, the speed at which that other missile hits it. That other missile, the air defense missile, is traveling quick. So 10 out of 10 for them. So that's really good. And then as we look further into the details of this one that hit Poland, or 2 that hit Poland, sorry. So just in case you didn't know, just over the border into Poland, there were 2 missiles that came down and 2 people have been killed in a village there. And the initial claims were that this was a Russian missile, and then everyone was talking about whether Article 5 of the NATO agreement should be invoked, which is that a strike on one NATO country is a strike on them all. We should all be able to retaliate. Then the question was like, well, was this aimed at Ukraine and accidentally went into Poland? And does that make any difference? And then the latest, so then you get claims like this, and this is a pro-Ukrainian claim saying lethal weapon debris collected following the missile strike on a Polish village indicates that a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile was used in the attack. This weapon has a CEP circular error probable of less than 5 meters, suggesting a deliberate Russian attack. So this guy is suggesting that this was a cruise missile that was aimed at Poland, which would be insane for Russia to do that. But anyway, and then even though it's got these sort of little holes in there, still claiming that it's one of these. Then says official Polish sources have confirmed that the missile that struck this village was Russian. The Russian forces are using the photo on the right in an attempt to convince you that the missile was a UKR S-300 SAM. You decide, believe Russia or Poland. So, you know, he's saying that this is a propaganda. But then Defmon says one day you'll get it right, but it isn't today. So Defmon is siding with, you know, a lot of open source intelligence people. There was a lot of trigger happy people online that are sort of making these claims that it's Russia. But it looks like it could well have been a surface-to-air defensive missiles from Ukraine. So the claim from Russia, this is a Reuters piece, the claim from, Duda, the Polish president, is that it was most likely a Russian-made missile. That tells you that very little in one sense, because a Russian-made missile could well be an S-300 missile shot from Ukrainian air defenses, because they're still Russian made. I've still got them left over from that period. The AP, Associated Press, has come out to say that they think, you know, the Polish government spokesman did not immediately confirm the information, but said leaders were meeting in crisis situation, but then later said that 3 US officials told the AP that preliminary assessments indicate the missile that struck Poland had been fired by Ukrainian forces at an incoming Russian missile. And then this sort of confuses matters, because, you know, where was that Russian missile? Where was the defensive missile? Where were they shot from? And how did they end up in Poland? And can Russia be held as much to account here as they initially were? You know, people are talking about Article 4 being invoked, which is a kind of an emergency situation that might lead to other actions from other members of NATO against Russia. We'll have to wait to see, but it is a bit of a messy situation now. As a bit of a retaliation, Russian oil depots been hit within Russia. So the Stalnoy Kon in Oryol Oblast, about 170 kilometers from Ukraine's border. So that was on fire last night. Seems to be under control now. So let's have a look at the Ukrainian reports for Russian deaths. 630 personnel, 10 tanks, 24 APCs, 10 artillery systems, and 75 cruise missiles. That's pretty, big stats, especially in terms of equipment. Is that still equipment for Kherson being included in that? Almost certainly. Lots of people, one of the most common questions to me is, what are the figures for Ukraine? And I'm going to talk to you about that at the end of this video. We're going to have a little chat about Ukrainian figures. So if you want to hold on, check that out. And I've got a couple of sources to delve into. But yeah, it's not easy to work that one out. Okay, let's go to the front lines. We're going to start in the northeast as per usual. So we have Kupiansk down to Svatove, down to Kreminna. A lot of activity going on, but not a lot of movement in terms of front lines. Just to let you know, that's the northeast, Kupiansk, Svatove, Kreminna, before we go further down south. This is an interview with a Ukrainian tank crew in the Kharkiv, so in the northern part of this area, talking to Radio Free Europe. And they talk about how, I won't play it to you, I'll just summarize it really quickly. They're talking about how it's like, they call it the meat grinder, that the Russians, they keep destroying Russian troops, and the Russians are filling those gaps with more troops, and they're mobilized troops, and they're not well trained, and when they get shot at, they run away. But essentially, these guys, quite a tired looking crew from doing so much work, it appears that the mobilized troops are just being used as cannon fodder and fed into this meat grinder. And it's just exhausting work. They're firing 50 shells a day and have been doing for some time. And it's, really interesting interview. I'll put a link to that in the description. Well worth listening to. So what do Rybar, the pro-Russian source, say about the area? Svatove direction. The Ukrainians assault groups have consolidated on the western edge of Stelmakivka and continued on to Kuzumivka. The advancing forces were spotted by Russian UAVs. Russian artillery forced the AFU back to starting positions. This is contested by the Ukrainians. Ukrainians say they've got a bit of a foothold in Kuzumivka. Then they go on to say, in the Liman sector, company of the AFU 25th Brigade, supported by armour, tried breaking through Chervona Popivka. Russian forces repulsed the attack and later struck the brigade's positions, killing two, blah, blah, blah. And then we go on to talk about the rest of that in a minute. So let's put that on a map. This is Kuzumivka, still really hot area. The Rybar we're talking about, Stelmakivka here. So pushing onto there from here with consolidation of Ukrainian forces. There's lots of talk about the Russians claiming the Ukrainians are amassing troops all over this front, really, up here and further down south. We heard yesterday about how the Ukrainians apparently burst across here into the Novomykilska area with 10 bits of mechanized equipment. Haven't heard anything about that since. There is a lot of this sort of attacking and getting into an area and then maybe retreating, sort of punching a hole and then doing a bit of recon. So recon with force maybe. I don't know whether that was a larger attack and whether there is some established foothold across this P66 highway. There was a report, and I did mention this yesterday, of an airstrike at an HQ in Maiorsk, killing at least 30 Russian military personnel and wounding more than 20. So they are continuing to hit behind the lines. And in fact, apparently HIMARS are working hard. There are 3 HIMARS strikes. Supposedly, this is according to Russian sources, this far to the east of Severodonetsk. So 3 HIMARS attacks there. I won't even begin to tell you the name of that place. Dezen, no, I started to, but I won't. A place there. But yeah, fierce fighting all up and down these lines. What does ISW say about this? Russian military bloggers claim the Ukrainian forces attempted to advance towards Kreminna from the north and south, but were unsuccessful, and that fighting is ongoing 12 kilometers south of Kreminna near Bilohorivka. We'll get onto that next. Military bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces are accumulating near Makivka. and are probably nearby Russian defensive positions. Another military blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are amassing to launch future offensives at Svatove, Kreminna, Lysychansk, and Popasna. Russian forces continue to conduct limited counterattacks likely to constrain the actions of Ukrainian forces and not to regain limited territory. Okay, so this is worth hammering home that the attacks from the Russians aren't to go and grab huge amounts of territory and be sort of concerted counterattacks with a larger strategy. It is just a tactic to hold down Ukrainians, to pin them back in certain areas so they aren't advancing themselves. But there are talks about amassing forces and this idea that they are attacking Kreminna from the north and the south. So the idea that they are trying to maybe come around here. This is the Chervonopopivka around here, and Ploshchanka. There's a lot of fighting still in Ploshchanka, which is here. Reports from both sides that is still heavy. And the Russians are shelling Ploshchanka, which means that Ukrainians are there, and Chervonopopivka, which is here. So this idea that they are going to sort of try and circle around to the north of Kreminna, but now there is talk that they are attacking to the south in these forested areas. There's quite a lot of forested areas around Kreminna, and Dubrova is now contested. So that's this area here. So this is this village that I was talking, or small town I was talking about recently, just north of this forested area, which is now accepted to be contested. I said that the Ukrainians took that and then the Russians took it back, and then now it's contested. And this might show that there is this concerted effort to attack south of Kreminna. But Bilohorivka is very hotly contested at the moment, and there are apparently Ukrainian attacks down to the east through Zolotarivka. And whether that's this wider encirclement of Kreminna or that's quite a long way further south and nearer to Lysychansk, don't know what the strategy is for the Ukrainians there. But the point is there is a bit of a pushback, and the Russians keep talking about these amassing troops. With these kind of attacks, it doesn't seem like a full concerted operation like we just seen in Kherson, but the sort of operations we saw before that major move. Now, you could argue that in Kherson it was actually the Russians withdrawing rather than the Ukrainians attacking, but the Ukrainians had amassed to such a point that the attack was imminent, and then the Russians got out of there. Now, these look like the sorts of attacks that happened before a large-scale attack. So again, what is the major strategy here? Are they going to mount a large offensive around the Svatove area? There is lots of talk about Russians in Svatove really struggling as far as mobilized troops drinking from puddles, having low morale, being decimated. Really up to 2,500 perhaps in one regiment alone. All this talk about troops being lost on a meat grinder. But at some point, are the Ukrainians going to do a concerted attack there? It seems so, just not quite sure when. Just to confirm that here, Noel Report says I changed Chervona Dubrova to contested. The Ukrainian forces are reportedly gained a foothold south of Kreminna, and Russian forces reported that sources reported that forces are facing a difficult situation near Ploshchanka, and the Ukrainians are pushing there. Ploshchanka has been shelled today. Then we move further south to Bilohorivka, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. So Bilohorivka there, Dubrova now contested. Bilohorivka. Defmon says Bilohorivka has been the main focus for Russian forces during the last week or so. They had some initial success, but as per usual, that's not quite true. They don't hold that, and they keep attacking the village as per usual. So again, I've got that as contested. As we come further south down to the Bakhmut area, not a lot of change, not a lot of activity. Well, a lot of activity, not a lot of movement at all. So actually, this is the least amount of time I'm going to spend on Bakhmut. Just much of the same. As we come down to Maiorsk, there is some talk about Maiorsk, as there have been over the days. Different claims as to who controls Maiorsk. In the battles for Maiorsk, the 1st Horly Territorial Battalion mobilized from Donbass lost 50% of its personnel and was disbanded, says the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So Maiorsk, which looks like the Russians have made advances there, the point of saying that is at a huge cost to them. They've disbanded a whole sort of unit there, a whole battalion there, because they've had 50% of that battalion lost. So it looks like Russians have got the upper hand there, but at a huge cost. Now, down in Avdivka, where the Russians are definitely giving a lot of trouble to the Ukrainians up north as they push into Krasnoshirivka and push out from Pervomaisky, Vodyane, and Opitny around there. That's their attempt, is to get this encirclement happening and then force the Ukrainians to pull out along this road and, out of there. That's their hope, and actually they are causing the Ukrainians quite a lot of issue around there, especially up north. I think there's been some renewed pressure. As a result, the Russians are saying, so let's find the Rybar. The Ukrainians are bringing in reinforcements and building additional fortifications to hold on to the Avdivka garrison. Clashes continue in Vodyane and Nevelsky. An army recon group failed to penetrate advancing Russian lines in Pervomaisky. So that's what's happening there. Russian forces continue to clear the northern edge of Opitny under constant Ukrainian artillery and rocket fire. Airview struck residential areas in Donetsk, Korlivka, and a bunch of other places and towns in the metro area. So it looks like there's really hot fighting here, and Ukrainians do want to hold on to this. And if the Russians can be trusted here, that the Ukrainians are reinforcing this area, and then hammering the Russians with artillery and rockets just around the Opitny area, which the Russians took sort of last week. As we move further down south here, we come on to Vuhledar and Pavlivka, which pretty much remains a bit of a hellhole for the Russians as they just get hammered around the Pavlivka area. It seems a bit of a death trap there. As no report says, my sources tell that Pavlivka is divided 50-50 and Ukraine is pounding it from Vuhledar with artillery and with airstrikes. Russian forces stay entrenched in the southern or eastern area part but suffer heavy losses. Russia attacked Avdivka but got repelled. So this is interesting. Rather than the Russian claims that they hold the whole of Pavlivka, no reports are saying it's 50-50. So I've just kept my line there anyway. It's just who knows what's going on there exactly. But that the Ukrainians are pounding Pavlivka, and this, as I say, a bit of a death trap for the Russians. But the Russians are apparently also hitting Vuhledar with air support and artillery. So there's a combined army approach there. And ISW say that the Russian 36th Combined Arms Army has been seen or been evidence in the Vuhledar direction. So it could be that they are putting a lot of effort into that. But it's worth just dwelling on this for a second. This is some of the sort of summary points that the ISW have made around the area. So Russian military commanders reportedly ignored existing plans for offensive operations in the Vuhledar direction and committed poorly trained reinforcements to costly assaults on Pavlivka out of impatience. The high costs associated with the Russian offensive push on Pavlivka continue to generate criticism of Russian military leadership, and Russians are increasingly turning to various platforms on social media to express their dissatisfaction with mobilization problems, a phenomenon that has ingredients to ignite organized online-based movements in Russia. So this is all kind of connected. The kind of meat grinder effect that I was talking about up in Svatove is definitely what's going on here in Pavlivka, and it's causing an awful lot of casualties for the Russians in that area, which then gives pushback from Russian military bloggers online who are saying, well, what are you doing? The kind of strategy that's being adopted by the military commanders is just nonsensical and giving a lot of pushback. So it's a really interesting scenario, and I think Pavlivka is one of the places that kind of sums that up the best. As we move along the line to the Kherson area, just a case of huge amounts of rumors going on about what is happening everywhere, and the good old Kimburn spit is still just being talked about a lot. My guess is that special forces are operating around there quite a lot, but might not, it's not like it's under control or anything like that, as was originally thought. Ukraine has been reported to hit two more of Russia's bases in the Kherson Oblast. Kalanchak and Svatove are reportedly smoking after long-range pinpoint Russian strikes. And here, it seems that the reports from several official sources of Russian units having pulled back 15 to 20 kilometers from the Dnipro were false. Such a move never made any military sense. In addition, the attack on the Kimben Spit may have been limited to a commando raid. So this is kind of like trying to deal with all these various claims. And no report says no map changes. The head of the Joint Press Center South, Gumenyuk, said the Russians in the Kherson region are withdrawing troops 15 to 20 kilometers from the Dnipro in order to protect themselves from shelling by the armed Russian forces of Ukraine. And so, these are the claims and counterclaims on the same side of what is going on there. And collaborator and Russian appointed head of Kherson Military Civilian Administration, Volodymyr Saldo, reports a complete shutdown of the Kakhovskaya HPP, the power plant. The General Staff, Russian forces are withdrawing some of their units from Skadovsk and Henichensky districts to Crimea. So that's the new capital of the Kherson Oblast. So let's talk about some of these places. Okay, Sverdlovsk is here, and that has apparently been hit. And Kalanchak as well. So two bases there have been hit. And then this is Henichesk over here, depending on how you pronounce it, how you spell it, is the new Kherson Oblast regional capital now, according to the Russians. And that's because it's on this kind of hub and very safe from, or somewhat safe from, HIMARS and certainly artillery. So that's why they put that there. But again, there's talk that there are, evacuations going on down to Crimea from various places. The claim that 15 to 20 kilometers back has been cleared out of artillery and they're not really active there kind of fits in with a lack of artillery attack on Kherson. And I was talking about this yesterday. I haven't heard much about that. But then it's also being denied. Just being pulled back make no sense. But then, I'd like to see evidence of that. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot of activity going on here. But again, operational security, maybe there is stuff happening. And again, exactly what's happening on Kimben Spit, I just keep trying to find out stuff all the time on that, and it's just very difficult to get any sort of meaningful data out of that. We're left with kind of wondering exactly what Ukraine are going to do next. They are hitting these places, where yesterday I was talking about Holopristan and all the way up further north. They're hitting these areas with artillery, and one would think HIMARS as well, softening this area, you could argue, for some kind of offensive that might come later, or not, keeping maybe fixing Russian troops in here so they can't be moved elsewhere because they're afraid of an offensive. Who knows? Okay, I was going to talk to you about Ukrainian losses. Lots of people asking about this, and not many people seem to know what the Ukrainian losses are. Let's refer to Don Nichols on the Ukraine the Latest podcast for the Daily Telegraph to have a little chat about this.
Brilliantly. However, I was in a background brief this morning with a Western official, and I'll just zap through the some of the sort of points that were made there. As ever, I'm not going to say who this individual was. That's not the terms of the deal. You trust me or you don't trust me that that what I'm saying is correct. I happen to trust the individual who spoke to me, but it's up to you to believe me or not.
So here we are. This is part about troop losses.
Just two more bits and pieces, tactical updates. So Mark Milley, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, he said the other day, he was talking about casualty figures. He said that Russia had suffered about 100,000 and said Ukraine was a similar figure. And because we have no figures, almost no figures at all on either side, and we have a degree of skepticism about the figures put out by the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A healthy skepticism, I think. I don't think we're being derogatory there. And they have actually shown themselves to be fairly accurate, we think, throughout the course of this war. They're currently saying Russia has slightly over 80,000 killed, which standard metric being 3 or 4 times that number wounded. So a huge number of dead and wounded Russians. Mark Milley suggested 100,000 was about the right figure for Ukraine as well, which had a lot of people commenting on it. Western officials I spoke to today recognise those figures, so they're broadly accurate, but that Russia has suffered more fatalities. So largely suggesting Ukraine casualty figures are around the 100,000 level, but many more wounded. Obviously, being wounded can cover everything from minor to very, very serious, life-changing, you're not going to fight again, off the battlefield injuries, of course. So that is worth noting, but it's also suggesting that they will have more of those fighters ready to go back to the line at some point. And just finally, the point was raised by my friend and colleague Shashank over at the Economist. He had mentioned that Ukrainian military intelligence have recently said that Russia is thought to have only about 120 Iskander ballistic missiles left in their stocks, and that Russia has only about a month's worth of artillery, dumb bomb artillery left. Both figures were, quote, in the right ballpark, unquote, said the Western official, with munitions being a massively limiting factor for both sides at the moment. So overall, the message there from the Western official, and what we've kind of seen, is that the line of contact is very static. It's still very active, and bar the withdrawal from Kherson, it really isn't moving very far. Russia seemed to be.
So what he goes on to talk about, and that's really interesting about the cruise missiles, and there's some analysis that's come out from yesterday's cruise missile attack that they really used up a good proportion of their cruise missiles. In fact, this is exactly what ISW have said, which is Russian forces conducted this attack yesterday, and the military likely used up a substantial portion of its remaining high-precision weapon systems in its coordinated strikes. So, that is puts Russia in an interesting situation going forward, and this may be a sign that if they're willing to use all of them, that they are going to get a whole bunch more from Iran. I don't know. We shall see. But what Dom Nichols goes on to talk about in terms of casualties is the golden hour. So the key is getting your injured soldier to somewhere where they can be acted on, where life-saving treatment can be given within an hour. If that doesn't happen, they're going to die. And in fact, going into the winter time, that's looking like it's going to be more challenging. So you're likely to see a greater number of people who die, who could have been saved, but die because it's so cold and things, are much more difficult. Now, he talks about this golden hour as being really important. And then you hear this stat that actually Russia have more fatalities out their numbers of casualties. It's a bit confusing as to what casualty means and how many deaths, and so there's still some kind of lack of clarity to do with definitions and the numbers being used there, but they're saying they're broadly the same, but that Russia have a higher number of fatalities. And then you go across, so this is a very good BBC segment about a bunch of doctors on the front line, and you're thinking that Ukraine probably have a greater capability to do this than the Russians, and what's going on behind the Russian lines. And this could explain why you have this greater number of survivors, as claimed earlier. And this golden hour is being super important, is something that you see, on the front lines here with these doctors.
They are the doctors in the line of fire, battling the daily carnage of war.
My name is Valeria. I am a nurse anesthetist.
Treating the wounded, the dying.
My name is Victor. I am a surgeon.
On front lines where every second counts.
My name is Ruslan. I'm a chief medic.
We're fighting for our land, for our future, for our children.
My name is Olga. I am a nurse.
The lives of Ukraine's soldiers are in their hands. They're Ukraine's secret weapon, the medics in the line of fire.
And just to skip on a bit here.
So Ola is going to be treating the man when he's on his way to the main hospital.
And this is a guy with shrapnel wounds, and they were saying this was the most common form of injury that they get. Like, when a shell goes off and shrapnel from the shell or from the thing it hits, like, flies into to people, to soldiers. This is a really common injury.
at the rear.
So he's
gonna be okay. You can
being
see that
taken to hospital.
He's walking out of here. This is a fairly typical injury. It's mostly shrapnel that they treat here. There's a lot of Russian artillery coming in, though he was with a mine-sweeping unit. An interesting thing that these doctors tell us, though, is that since the arrival of thousands of Russian conscripts on this front, they're now treating more Ukrainian soldiers for bullet wounds from close-quarter fighting.
So that's really interesting. So now you're seeing much more close quarter fighting, that all the mobilized troops are being sent into the meat grinder, whereas before it's just artillery contests between each other. That's an interesting observation. And it goes on later on in this, they find they have a guy with some serious injuries, and they troop him off to hospital. Will he make it? And it looks like he's going to make it, but as they drive off to hospital, there are flashes of artillery in the distance at night. These guys are working in the kind of the range of opposition enemy artillery. But this whole piece was really interesting because it's about linking these bits of data together. It's saying, okay, Russians are dying more, Ukrainians are dying less in the same situation. Why is that? And then you see this and you go, okay, I can piece that together. The Ukrainians might have this network of doctors working on the front lines, which this report insinuates, and that these guys could be responsible for, allowing people to survive due to that golden hour. If you can get this quality treatment within the hour, then you've got a fighting chance of surviving, and that could differentiate the casualty numbers in terms of fatalities, at least between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but similar numbers they're saying. So that's very interesting. I'll seek to unpack that a little bit as I go forward. Anyway, I hope that was all useful for you. Lots more to say, and I'm trying to hold myself back from saying so much because I talk too much. But anyway, please check out my interview with Tim White that's going to be taking place in a couple of hours' time, 12:30 UK time. By the time this video gets out, it's probably about an hour's time. But please help support the channel in any way you can. That's really, really great. I'm very grateful for your support. Just if you also just like, subscribe, and share, that's hugely appreciated. Anyway, take care, and I shall see you later. Or you shall see me.